Welcome to Bledsoe Said So, you guys. Thank you for tuning in every week and following along with our story. This week, I wanted to talk about a topic that is of great interest to me and also a concept that I think is very important to understand on the spiritual path. So before I get into the topic of initiation, I want to just go ahead and mention three things. BledsoeSaidSo.com. Check us out. You can find all of our links, all of our profiles. It's more or less the portal to Bledsoe Said So world. You can find our Patreon on there, our merch, which is a great way to support the show. Check us out on Bledsoe Said So. The Instagram, the handle is Bledsoe Said So. That's where all of our social media clips, our current events, upcoming conference schedules, which one is coming up very soon that I'll be talking about within the next few episodes. Public appearances, sky watches, things like that, which right now at this point, we don't have any public sky watches planned except for at this conference that I will soon be talking about. And then check us out on Patreon, which is a great way to support the show, and even be a part of the show with things like your name in the credits, our Discord community. We have a show on there and we're working on a lot of extra things on our Patreon. So stay tuned for that. And here in the next couple months or so, we're going to have a completely revamped Patreon with a lot more benefits and ways to support the show. So without further ado, I want to just kind of move into the topic of initiation. What do you think of when I say initiation?
I think a lot of things, really. And I've been thinking about this all day because I knew you were going to ask me. But I tend to kind of think of like secret societies immediately, or secret clubs or fraternities or, things of that nature.
Gangs.
Where there kind of needs to be some barrier for entry, right? Yeah. You got to weed out the people who really want to be there. And, I don't really endorse gangs, but I do kind of like the concept of initiation. Like, I'm pretty fond of the concept as far as like, who really wants to be here?
Yeah.
I don't like violence. Or hazing or anything like that of that nature, but like, I am pretty fond of an initiation.
Yeah. It's a cool concept, right? So I'm just going to start with the definition. This is like Wikipedia, very bare bones, not like esoterically interpreted or anything like that. Initiation is a rite of passage marking entrance or acceptance into a group or society. It could also be a formal admission to adulthood in a community or one of its formal components. In an extended sense, it can also signify a transformation in which the initiate is reborn into a new role. So this is like the standard definition, just conceptually, of what the word initiation means. Obviously, on Bledsoe Said So, what I want to focus about is the spiritual understanding of initiation and what it is. But I think that this term is very complex. And as you said, when we hear the word initiation, we think of a ritual or we think of some drama or play, and those do happen and those are real and true. They are initiations, but in the understanding on the deeper levels, it's a spiritual process that unfolds within the individual. It is a part of the evolutionary cycle of humankind, that as we are evolving the psychic faculties, we undergo the initiation process, which is multiple levels of the psychic senses unfolding as we reach higher levels of realization and develop the actual organs, according to Rudolf Steiner, and the faculties within the actual physical human body to have a higher perception of spiritual realities. So it's so much more than just a play or a drama or anything like that. And in fact, I'm just going to go ahead and quote Rudolf Steiner. Let me back up. I'm going to quote Dr. Gilbert, who's quoting Dr. Rudolf Steiner. Dr. Robert Gilbert, rest in peace. He is a wonderful human being who just even spending one evening with him completely changed my life. It was either last year or the year before. It's been a while now and time blurs, but it wasn't too long ago. He very suddenly passed away. And I think it was a big shock to the sort of metaphysical space. He was prolific. He was just very impactful and probably one of the most profound modern Rosicrucian thinkers. And it was because of him that I became very fascinated in Rosicrucianism in the first place. So anyway, rest in peace, Dr. Gilbert. But this is a quote from one of his lectures from back when he was living. Initiation rituals present in allegorical form the process of spiritual development. So when you think of long ago in the times of Egypt, ancient Greece, Persia, India, Tibet, China, where Buddhism was very prevalent in the East as it was, forming Hinduism, all that stuff. They all had these different kinds of ritual initiations. Maybe there's the concept of the priest in the West or the guru in the East, right? And it's more or less, I don't want to say authoritarian because that's not the right connotation, but it's a hierarchy. There's a hierarchical structure of temple tradition, where you go to the temple to receive instruction from a master. So in the way ancient past, probably starting back in the times of Egypt, they had the mystery schools. And they had the temples within the pyramids and all over Egypt where you would go to these temples and you would receive knowledge. But back in these days, you had to more or less prove you were a worthy candidate, right? You had to walk a certain path for a while to be deemed worthy to be brought into the inner temple to receive the mysteries, which even then, even all the way back then, the mysteries that were dispensed to worthy candidates or initiates, as they would become, had to be earned. You have this kind of allegorical sense of, wielding Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, or the legend of finding the Holy Grail or pulling King Arthur's sword from the stone. All of these are just allegories for receiving inner spiritual initiations by following the way, the spiritual way, or the path, and unfolding the psychic senses through the development of moral, spiritual, all of these faculties that make you a good person, more devoted to your family, to your friends, to your community, being kind-hearted, all of these qualities. You had to prove devotion to these. And some traditions even held vows of silence. Like I believe we did an episode on the Essenes, right? And we talked about the Therapeutae of Egypt. I think they had like a year-long silent period or something like that. And all of that was just to prove to the masters, all right, this dude's for real. He really wants the mysteries, right? Well, what are the mysteries? Well, now we know that and I'm going to read from actual Rosicrucian resources here in a moment, but we know that the mysteries were very powerful, multi-dimensional knowledge about consciousness and about the nature of reality and the subject and condition that we are in here in earth life, and the truth of God and the source that all creation emanates from. So the esoteric thread, right? When you think like the Gnostic tradition, the Hermetic tradition, the Rosicrucians, the alchemists, the Templar Knights, the Egyptian mysteries, the Grecian mysteries, which is Greece, all of these similar traditions that are like kind of saying the same things. Well, they were all traveling these ancient lands, learning in their temples, and they were sharing knowledge, right? And they were learning from one another. I believe it's, I can't remember the exact, I could find it if I wasn't sitting here hosting, right? But I don't think it's Timaeus. Long story short, I talked about this in the very first episode of the show, Let's Get Mystical, where one of the, and full disclosure, I have a very hard time keeping it together in my head, which one is Aristotle, which one is Socrates, and which one is Plato, because like one of them is not even a real person and he's using the other one's name. It just confuses me. But one of them writes about Solon, which is a relative of theirs. And Solon is, I think it was Plato. Solon is going to Egypt. And then he comes back and he's talking about how he learned about the mysteries of Atlantis, or rather that he learned the great spiritual mysteries from the priests in Egypt. And then he says, but even the priests of Egypt bow to the masters of the wisdom of Atlantis. So like 400 years before the birth of Christ, we have these Greek writers talking about how even in Greece, they go to learn knowledge and wisdom of the mysteries from the spiritual masters in the land of Egypt, who even all the way back then claimed that their knowledge came from a higher source, a more ancient source. So the point of this is there is a thread, if you know where to look, where, you have authors like Pythagoras who talked about going to India, to all these different places, Egypt, and learning. You have different documents that talk about Jesus doing this. There's even actual Nag Hammadi texts that talk about Jesus traveling to different lands, So you have this thread of back in the ancient times, people would be so hungry for the spiritual tradition that they would go visit temples in all these various lands, and they would learn and they would increase their knowledge of the mysteries, right? So a little bit of a tangent, but I just wanted to talk about how this information has always been there, and it's more or less kind of always been deemed dangerous by the authorities and the powers that be. And we'll talk a little bit later about how when the mystery schools became united under Thutmose III, it was just a few decades later that there was a young pharaoh, Amenhotep IV, who was so enamored by these mysteries that he changed his name to be Akhenaten, which is something to the effect of the Aten, which is the solar disk. And he changed their religion to be monotheistic, to observe the solar disk, Aten, the true God, right? And we've talked about this before, where in the far past, when they had the symbol of the sun, they're not telling you that they worship the physical sun, but rather that they observe the esoteric view of God. The very person who established Egypt as a monotheistic religion, even though that didn't hold, and some later dynasty did that back to the kind of earlier polytheistic version. But that is a very real part of history, and it's even in the Bible. It talks about this in the Bible, in the books of Moses, where he's, bringing the Jewish people from enslavement in Israel. And you have the story about like the 10 plagues. You know that story, right? It even says in there that Egypt was so afraid of the power of God that they changed their religion to, believe in the true God, the one true God. So anyway, we even have real historical occurrences where pharaohs, high and mighty leaders of nations, are so enamored by these mysteries. Great philosophers, Renaissance men, literally and figuratively, scientists, that they are becoming initiated into these mysteries, and they're secretly influencing culture because it was more or less dangerous knowledge, and still is today. I don't feel like it's dangerous in the sense that it's bad for people. I feel like it's dangerous in the sense that when you are exposed to truth and you understand that you've been lied to your whole life and that you've been gamed, and that the system is rigged against you, and as a fact that might actually be a very part of the condition of living here, it's not so good for the powers that be when all of us come together and we start thinking on our own.
And in the short term, it also might not be super beneficial for the person either.
Yeah.
It's one of those ignorance is bliss scenarios where it's like, yeah, I'd like to know, but do I really want to know? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It makes everyday life just a little bit harder.
But see, here's the thing. There are a lot of people in the world like that. And I think the very best visual representation of that I've seen in recent years is Cypher from The Matrix. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people like that. You've seen The Matrix, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember Cypher?
I'm struggling to.
He's the bald-headed dude that betrays Neo, and he's seen meeting with agents, and he's having conversations with them about like...
Okay, yeah, I just looked him up.
And the agent's like, that stake's not real. Or basically he's like, I know it's not real, but my brain tells me it is,
But
and
it
I
tastes
enjoy
good.
it. Yeah, it
Yeah,
tastes good.
yeah.
I'm fine with that. Like, I'm totally cool living in the Matrix. I don't care about any of this crap. I just want to go back to how it was. Like, there are people like that. That is a fact. And it's just a sad part of reality that there are many souls that don't care about the truth.
But that's exactly why initiation exists.
Yes. Yes. And that's exactly why in ancient times you had to prove you were worthy, because it was dangerous for this knowledge to be freely spread. And we have so much evidence that when this knowledge was starting to hit critical mass and get out there, that it would become brutally suppressed. And the authorities, whether it be, I'll just say, at the time, the Roman Catholic Empire, they start suppressing these movements, slaughtering people, banning them as heresy, burning Templars at the stake, slaughtering Cathars or, Gnostic Christians. And there was even bishops at the time who were more aligned with this way of thinking. And even then, Gnosticism is just another continuation of the mysteries. So let's talk a little bit more about the mysteries to understand initiation. So this is actually from a real Rosicrucian website. This is one of the largest, if not the largest, bodies of Rosicrucianism in the world today. It's the AMORC, which is the American branch of Rosicrucianism, and it stands for the Ancient Mystic Order of Rosicruces. So this is copied right from their website. The Rosicrucian movement, of which the Rosicrucian Order, AMORC, is the most prominent modern representative, has its roots in the mystery traditions, philosophy, and myths of ancient Egypt, dating back to approximately 1500 BCE in antiquity. The word mystery referred to a special gnosis, or a secret wisdom. Thousands of years ago in ancient Egypt, select bodies or schools were formed to explore the mysteries of life and learn the secrets of hidden wisdom. Only sincere students, displaying a desire for knowledge and meeting certain tests, were considered worthy of being inducted into these mysteries. Over the course of centuries, these mystery schools added an initiatory dimension to the knowledge they transmitted. It is further traditionally related that the order's first member students met in secluded chambers in magnificent old temples where, as candidates, they were initiated into the great mysteries. Their mystical studies then assumed a more closed character and were held exclusively in temples which had been built for that purpose. Rosicrucian tradition relates that the Great Pyramids of Giza were most sacred in the eyes of initiates. Contrary to what historians affirm, our tradition relates that the Giza pyramids were not built to be the tombs of pharaohs, but were actually places of study and mystical initiation. The mystery schools over centuries of time gradually evolved into great centers of learning, attracting students from throughout the known world. Pharaoh Thutmose III, who ruled Egypt from 1500 to 1447 BC, organized the first esoteric schools of initiates founded upon principles and methods similar to those perpetuated today by the Rosicrucian Order, AMORC. Decades later, Pharaoh Amenhotep IV was initiated into the secret school. The most enlightened pharaoh, history's first monotheist, was so inspired by the mystery teachings that he gave a completely new direction to Egypt's religion and philosophy. He established a religion which recognized the Aton, the solar disk, as being the symbol of the sole deity, the foundation of life itself, the symbol of light, truth, and joy, and changed his name to Akhenaten to reflect these new ideas. And although the earlier religion was later reestablished, the mystical idea was put forth in human consciousness, and its flame never died. Centuries later, Greek philosophers such as Thales and Pythagoras, the Roman philosopher Plotinus, and others journeyed to Egypt and were initiated into the mystery schools. They then brought their advanced learning and wisdom to the Western world. Their experiences are the first records of what eventually grew and blossomed into the Rosicrucian Order. The name of the order, as it is now known, was to come much later. However, the Rosicrucian Order always perpetuated its heritage of ancient symbolism and principles. It was in the time of Charlemagne, in 742 to 814, that the French philosopher Arnaud introduced the mystical teachings into France, and from there they spread to much of Western Europe. Throughout medieval Europe, mystical knowledge was often necessarily couched in symbolism or disguised and hidden in the love songs of troubadours, the formularies of alchemists, the symbolical system known as the Kabbalah, and the ritual orders of knighthood. While much of medieval Europe lay in darkness, the highly advanced Arab civilization preserved a large body of the mystical teachings through texts translated directly from the great libraries of the ancient world, such as Egypt's Alexandria Library. Philosophy, medicine, mathematics, and alchemy were all important subjects preserved in these libraries and later transmitted to Europe by the way of Arabs. Just a side note, I'm going to pause and then finish the quote. If you talk to Freemasons, A lot of the original knowledge that they were preserving was advanced mastercraft in stonemasonry, which includes what? Mathematics, science. That's why their symbol's the square and the compass, right? Alchemy, the art of transmutation, came into prominence with the Alexandrian Greeks. It was then introduced to the Arabs, who then transmitted this art and the forerunner of chemistry to Europe. The alchemists played a tremendous part in the early history of the Rosicrucian order. While many alchemists were interested in making gold, some were more concerned with the transmutation of human character. European alchemists and Knights Templar, in contact with the Arab civilization at the time of the Crusades, brought much of this wisdom to the West. In Europe, the transcendental alchemists, mystics, and philosophers sought to transmute the base elements of human character. That's why I brought this quote. That's the whole crux of all of this. Sought to transmute the base elements of human character into the more noble virtues and to release the wisdom of the divine self within the individual. Some of the renowned alchemists who were also Rosicrucians or were closely associated with them were Albertus Magnus, Roger Bacon, Paracelsus, I don't even know how to say this one, Cagliostro, Nicholas Flamel, and Robert Flood. And then here's the final part of this Rosicrucian reference, right? Initiations are as old as the earliest civilizations. The ancient Egyptians learned that the performance of various acts and the use of certain objects helped to facilitate instruction, so that mystical ideas were more easily impressed upon the minds of the students. Dramas of impressive ceremonies consisting of music, spectacular lighting, processionals, chanting, and colorful ritual robes became an unforgettable experience to each participant. These mystery dramas were somewhat like the modern-day passion plays. In ancient times, the word mystery did not have the same connotation that it does now. It did not mean strange or weird. Rather, it referred to a unique gnosis, that is, knowledge, which was to be revealed to the candidate for initiation. In fact, in ancient Rome, the mysteries were called initia. The initiates were called mystae. The Latin word initiare meant to inspire, and initium meant beginning or training. Thus, candidates for initiation were introduced to an inspiring knowledge that was to make an emotional or psychic impression upon their consciousness, as well as to add to their knowledge. In a dramatic way, the initiation sheds illumination upon certain subjects which otherwise may not be thoroughly understood and appreciated. Further, the mystical aspect of initiation arouses your psychic and emotional response concerning the subjects you are about to study and produces an awareness, a state of consciousness which otherwise could not be achieved. Rosicrucian initiations are rituals designed to mark the milestones of a student's progress on the mystical path. In these beautiful rituals, mystical laws and principles are demonstrated in a dramatic form in order to both inform and inspire the Rosicrucian student. Okay, so first off, I got that from, I think it's amorc.org. I feel like I owe them a plug. Also, I just love their work. AMORC, it's www.rosicrucian.org. So I just wanted to go ahead and drop that so that people can read through the literature on their own. But the main reason I wanted to talk about that is because you're seeing real evidence of an actual living wisdom tradition that spans many thousands of years, telling you right out what it represents, what it meant to the ancients, why they still do it today. Most importantly, these initiations serve as dramas, as it very much just said blatantly, to leave an emotional and psychic impression upon your consciousness so that you reach deeper levels of understanding, basically about reality. So we get into the multidimensional nature of existence. And we understand that when we're talking about such things, which are things for big boys and girls, right? This is heavy conversation. We have to understand that the physical world is a lower emanation from higher worlds. We have to, when we think of reality itself, God, the creator, we have to think in terms of emanation theology. It's not just that there's earth and there's heaven and hell. That's not quite how it is. But there are many levels and multitudes of order throughout existence. It's like layers of reality, where on this layer, there's these beings. And then on this layer, there's archangels. And on this layer, there's, aeons, as the Gnostics would call them, which are like, the lady. And then on this level is source consciousness. And it goes up and down a lot of layers, right? As you go lower and lower down in the layers, down to our layer, which is pretty low, but not that low. This is a special layer, right? That's another conversation. If you take a microscope and you look at the cells in your body, you will see that on the molecular level, there are patterns that represent the stars, the planets, the order in the universe. That at every observable level of reality, there are patterns in the way that things order themselves, that their behavior and movements are governed, and just how they function, right? And you look at even the iris in your eye, it looks like galaxies. You look at cells and how they clump together, and then you zoom up a little bit. You have cities, you have nations, you have countries, you have solar systems, you have galaxies, you have all that stuff. That's by design. That's intelligent design. This is just some really hard to understand and hard to fathom intelligent simulation that was thought into order from the mind of God, the one God, right? When they say the one true God, it's consciousness. It's the original thought, the original mind, really, that thought everything else into being. So you also should consider that because of this, that because we are just silly little lower emanations of higher worlds, much more intelligent and articulate designs that are not so crude and physical, but they are more spiritual and light and frequency, like non-physical dimensions that are purely psychic realms. Or you could say astral, whatever. Pick your New Age flavor. This is old concepts just said with 1,000 different words, right? In the way that the little cells represent much bigger and more grand, beautiful, intelligent designs of the stars and the cosmos, the process of evolution of human life is similarly reflected in a macrocosmic way. So the things that happen to us and unfold within our psyches and the choices that we make here on our evolutionary path are also reflective of higher order multidimensional concepts. So that was a very wordy way for me to set the stage with the premise that the ancients knew this very well. So the reason that they held these dramas and these initiations and created all these mythologies and these allegories was to tell you in a symbolic way that what is happening in the first place is not the play. It's not like, oh, you made it to a level of understanding, you get to go through a little hazing and then you're in the club. That's not what's happening. What's truly happening is there is a process of evolution that occurs when you go through this initiation or awakening process. What the ancients were telling you and what they're still telling you today, if you go through all these resources and know where to look, that there's evolution occurring on the planet throughout the human race. And in order to reach the next step in the evolutionary phase, it is 100% required that you experience, you could say, an awakening or an initiation, a spiritual initiation. That in order to awaken to the next level of consciousness in our evolutionary progression, you have to have development of the psychic faculties, right? There has to be a progression. How do you develop the psychic faculties? How do you evolve your consciousness? Well, we'll talk about that from the Steiner perspective. So Rudolf Steiner was an amazing individual as well. We recently did an episode on him. So the difference between in the ancient times when initiation, all of this mystery school stuff, it was more institutional and it was like hierarchical, and you more or less, you didn't have your phone where you could read every Steiner book on Kindle. or every, you go through AMORC's website and go through that on a self-paced study. That wasn't a thing back then, They were figuring out papyrus and all that. It was a lot of times word of mouth tradition for thousands of years. I think Hinduism was word of mouth for the first several hundred, if not thousands of years, until they finally wrote the Bhagavad Gita, And that's just how it was back then. It was word of mouth. So you more or less had to have a deep yearning to, and I want to add to this that I think everyone comes here and they're in some way seeking God. It's a part of our design. It's like a spark within our DNA. We all have that spark of divine consciousness. So we're seeking union with that part of ourselves. But the problem is our beliefs vary. So a lot of people say, well, I don't believe in God. Okay, well, you believe in something. You're seeking to be reunited with something, some sort of higher power, some sort of, maybe it's aliens. Maybe, I don't know. I don't want to go down the list. But everybody is seeking something. Everybody. And then there is that small percentage of people that they think they found that something and they're not seeking anything more. And then there's another category of people that are like us, that it's like, okay, well, I grew up Christian. I grew up God, but I need more. I need a deeper connection with this. I need to understand this on another level. I'm not satisfied. You know what I mean? What's it going to take to satisfy this? Where can I learn? So anyway, so those kinds of people would seek out these temples and they would more or less, become candidates on the path of initiation. And then they go through some sort of trial phase where they seek to prove themselves worthy. I mean, this was all over the world. This was Druids. This was Mithraic mystery tradition, everything. The Eleusinian mysteries and the Oracle of Delphi tradition. It goes on and on. Egypt, Tibet, all of it, right? You had to prove that you were a candidate worthy of initiation into the deeper mysteries of consciousness, of our multidimensional existence, the truth that God is, the original intelligent mind that thought everything into existence, and that there are angelic beings interceding on behalf of humanity. So just to kind of wrap up, I talked about from the Rosicrucian tradition, and just like a basic kind of shotgun spread about Egyptian tradition. So in Egyptian tradition, initiation referred to in the context of the mysteries or secret rites of temples and mystery schools was a sacred, rigorous process of spiritual transformation. It aimed to awaken higher knowledge or gnosis, prepare the individual for the afterlife, and achieve union with the divine forces, particularly through the Osiris myth cycle of death, dismemberment, resurrection, and rebirth. Because we all know the story of Osiris and how he was cut up into 14 pieces and then he was brought back to life. It's like eternal life, right? It symbolizes eternal life, death and rebirth eternally. That's the same as the Ouroboros, right? The serpent eating its tail. That's the universe. This is constant cycles of life, death, and then the rebirth of life. Unlike modern self-guided paths, Egyptian initiation in the ancient past was typically temple-based, hierarchical, and conducted under the guidance of priests or hierophants in sacred precincts like Abydos, which was the center of Osiris worship, Heliopolis, Memphis, or Thebes. It was reserved for those deemed worthy, usually priests or pharaohs, or select aspirants, which you're an aspirant before you're an initiate, after long preparation involving moral purification, study, fasting, silence, and ethical discipline. Ethical discipline. The process symbolized a symbolic death and rebirth, mirroring the myth of Osiris and the soul's journey through the Duat, or which is Egyptian for the underworld, to achieve eternal life as an Akh, which is an effective spirit. Candidates underwent extended periods of fasting, sometimes 40 days, prayer, study of sacred texts, abstinence from pleasures, and moral trials to purify the body, soul, and spirit. This built inner strength and detachment from material desires. Initiates face symbolic tests representing the four elements like earth, water, air, and fire, or confronting darkness, fear, and ego. These included the descent into darkness or symbolic tombs and chambers. We've talked about this on episodes past, like sometimes in Greek, when you were seeking to be initiated into the mysteries, they would literally create a set that represented like the labyrinth, and they would have people in Minotaur costumes, like the story of Daedalus and the Minotaur, and you would have to navigate through a dark, scary labyrinth, and they would have people, jump out at you and scare the crap out of you, and they would simulate, in some traditions, they simulate you being in hell. It's to really like show you the consequences of not staying on the spiritual path and what happens to your soul if you don't. So they were very serious and dramatic with these, creating entire dramas and plays. Encounters with guardians or deities like Anubis, the jackal-headed guide who conducted the soul and oversaw the mummification and rebirth rites, or symbolic death, lying in a sarcophagus, or experiencing ritual dismemberment and reassembly, echoing Osiris. I know in many traditions today, they have rituals where you have to lie in a coffin. I want to say they might do that in Freemasonry, but I can't confirm that. I don't know, but I know they do in Skull and Bones. But that's a different animal. I'm not on their side. Central was the passion play of Osiris. The initiate experienced vicariously the god's murder, scattering of limbs, search by Isis, resurrection, and triumph. This granted insight into immortality in the afterlife. Successful initiates received esoteric teachings on cosmology, which is basically the structure of the universe and its origin, The soul's immortality, magic, alchemy, hieroglyphic wisdom, and the hidden forces of nature. Secrets included the nature of the gods, the afterlife journey as in the Book of the Dead, and how to navigate judgment by Osiris, weighing your heart against Ma'at's feather, which is it's like the ostrich feather. Initiates swore vows of silence and ethical conduct. Revealing the mysteries was forbidden, and temple inscriptions they warned against disclosing the rites and the rituals. The secrecy preserved the power of the knowledge, and the initiate emerged twice born, which is why our band is called Twice Born, or regenerated, often with a new initiatory name. They gained continuity of consciousness beyond death, the ability to act as intermediaries between worlds, and sometimes priestly or magical authority. Pharaohs received high initiations aligned with Ra and the Great Pyramid to rule as divine instruments. So that stuff's great. It's history. It's awesome. I love studying that stuff. I love being connected to that stuff and learning about that stuff and talking to people who are firsthand involved with that stuff. It's very good stuff. But the whole point I want to make with this episode, to establish like the history and the tradition of this, that all of this served the purpose of being an allegory for the actual psychophysical evolution occurring within human beings that are undergoing spiritual development. That this was such a big deal to the ancients, this knowledge that we are evolving, that they created entire dramas and plays and orders around this, right? And the great point is that you don't have to do all that stuff. That's great. It's like, if you want to, do it. It's extracurricular. But this is a process that occurs within every one of us. What does that look like? Well, I know that when you, for example, if you've had a near-death experience in your life, or if you've, let's just say something crazy, if you've smoked DMT, or if you have experienced completely soul-crushing trauma, like many people have. I think most have it through this path, whether it's abuse or, whatever. A lot of people receive their initiation from trauma. So in my opinion, there are more or less 4 pathways to receive the first initiation. And that is the 3 that I just mentioned: some sort of powerful hallucinogenic, like probably DMT would be the one, near death, or extreme trauma, extreme trauma. Or you're somebody who is aware of this knowledge and you read about it and you have that calling in your soul to walk this path. So through rigorous discipline and focus and commitment, you willfully follow the steps that I'm kind of about to briefly go over to initiate this process of evolution within the body and the psyche for the extra senses to begin to unfold, where you gain abilities like clairvoyance, to where you begin to receive information from the spirit world, or you see UFOs as we know them. But we know that it's more complicated than that it's a spiritual phenomenon. So symptoms of initiation are things like spontaneous psychic appearances or experiences appearing, or having sightings of orbs of light, interdimensional beings, being able to perceive higher worlds, being able to perceive angelic beings coming from other realities. I can tell you that I can be next to somebody, and this isn't about me, I'm just talking about my experience, right? But I can be next to somebody who has no interest in this stuff at all, no curiosity, normal life, baseline, no trauma, none of that other stuff, none of these conditions required have been met. And we can be out sky watching, and I've been in many situations like this, and either they will not see an orb for whatever reason. Maybe I'll see it and they're looking away, or they'll see it and they're just like flat affect. Like, so is it a satellite? And I'm like, you just saw that appear. You just saw it flash and do this crazy thing. Like these kinds of people, there's no, it's like there's nothing there. You know what I mean? So I kind of forgot where I was going with that.
I just I'm trying to articulate this correctly. Not that the skeptic is that way, but that
they're not evolved enough to see. That's the point I was trying to make.
Right.
They can't see what you see.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not like, because I've had experiences with people who are at first like, that's a satellite, and then by the end of the sky watch are like, okay, no, it's not.
Yeah.
So there's like even an evolution or an initiation, if you will, that takes place through that one experience.
Yeah.
But I think what you're getting at is the person who writes it off and walks away.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because there's a difference between being skeptical and continuing to be curious.
But the skeptics, they're curious.
They're curious. Skeptical and curious is different than writing off and walking away.
Yeah, and that's a good point. There's levels to this. There's so many levels.
It's not black and white.
It's not. It's not.
Black and
There's
white.
many levels to this. There's people who are skeptical, but even then, skeptical people, you have people whose whole life is being a skeptic about UFOs. They really like UFOs. They're really into this topic. They want to know something, right? Unless they're a CIA plant.
And like on my side of the room, like it's different for me, right? Because I'm not you, and I don't have a childhood full of trauma about it, but I tend to generally be okay with the healthy, curious skeptic, because I'm not afraid of this being challenged because it's because it's real.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's totally fine with me if you're skeptic. What the frustrating bit is I would say the opposite of that, right? The unhealthy, closed-minded never believer. There's a difference between being skeptic and being a never believer.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But that's a different episode.
No, and that's true. But the point I'm trying to make in all of this, why am I even talking about initiation in the first place, is because this is a process that occurs within the individual. Okay. In order to see the orbs, in order to have profound spiritual and psychic experiences, like seeing angelic beings, or, maybe going out of body, or doing some sort of crazy, there's a ton of different psychic things that we can do. This isn't really the episode for that, but in order to do those things, you have to have undergone the process of initiation. I'm not saying the ritual process of initiation. I'm saying the real process of initiation, which is in your own being, you have strived to spiritually develop. Has nothing to do with being inside of a temple physically.
And there's been some process of attunement.
Yes. There's been a process.
Which looks different for everybody.
It does.
It's not cut and dry.
And it's not linear either. It's like one step forward or two steps forward, one step back.
Yeah. And it's not like one particular organization's version of initiation. This is like a very personal path that someone's on.
Yeah. And again, I'm trying to say it has nothing to do with organizations' initiation. The whole reason I wanted to talk about that for the first half was to show how in history they went through such great lengths to illustrate what this process is that occurs within every individual who walks on the path, or the way, as I call it, which I think, what do we say, 2 episodes from now, we're going to do that episode. Talk about the way. What is the way, right? In order to go through initiation, you have to be committed to the spiritual path. But, life is very complex. Human nature, reality, the spirits, it's very complex. It's never black and white. Sometimes, I have seen this many times, sometimes what occurs is the actual sighting of the beings or the orbs is the initiation. That is the catalyst for people to have spiritual experiences. It's never black and white. Mm-hmm. It's very complicated.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, kind of similar to that too, like the ritualistic, theatric version of initiation could be what begins the initiation. In a sense of like, if you think about it in terms of like a secret society, you do the work and you get initiated into this thing. And then through some sort of like kind of placebo or feeling like you belong, you begin to kind of start to walk the path and feel connected to whatever you're connected to organizationally.
I will tell you that with a lot of those orders, a lot of that initiation type stuff is more or less an attunement to thought forms or an actual spiritual force or something that I like to call an egregore, which is why the next episode I want to do that, because I want to talk about the importance of egregores. And that'll cover things like, why is Jesus real? Why should we care? Find out next week, I guess. But, these are very real forces, right? So like, let's say I become, just because I've been talking about Rosicrucians, you could just pick one, but I'll say Rosicrucian because that's been a very easy resource to quote, right? Because they're still active today. So let's say I become a Rosicrucian.
Okay, sorry. I've got a good example. You go ahead.
The Rosicrucians have more or less created an egregore, or also known as a thought form of the Rosicrucians. So everybody who's become initiated into that order, I really should be saving this for next week. Everybody who's become, initiated into that order, they're more or less inviting that force, that actual real spiritual energy that exists in the realm of thought because it's been charged by millions of souls for thousands of years. So anyway, we'll talk more about that next week. I don't want to get ahead of myself. What were you going to say?
I was going to say in a non-religious sense, like the Hell's Angels.
Yeah, that's a similar thing.
And it's kind of like, it gets weird because then I start kind of trailing off and I think brand ethos, like working at Nike or like these huge global ideas of...
That's an egregore.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just to get away from the religion for a second.
Yeah.
Because it's not all religious.
No, but
egregores next week.
But no, but it's all real though.
Right.
It doesn't have to be attached to a religion to be real, because the truth is that's how the universe operates. Nike's an egregore in the same way Christianity's an egregore.
Right.
Christianity's a more powerful one because it's, a spiritual force. But you can't say that there's not kids out there that are like, Mom, please, I want forces for Christmas.
Let's talk about spiritual force. Let's talk about Air Force.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm not plugging Air Forces. I'm just saying the example that it is a force, it's an egregore. It's a real force. Because that's how the universe works, and everything exists within the realm of mind, and there are dimensions that are no physical matter entirely, and they're purely psychic thought. These egregoric forces, and in some cases entities, like malevolent spirits that people on this world are creating through greed and darkness. And like we talked about in the Waitiko Dark Force episode, those are malevolent, more or less entities, I believe, that have become personified because they're created through our dark thoughts, right? And there's obviously good ones too. And then aside from that, there are entities that exist before we were created, like angels, right? It's very complicated what exists out there in the universe. But yeah, so but I want to stress that I'm not like convincing, and the point of this episode is not to say sign up for an order today. That's not the point. The point I wanted to highlight is that this initiation process is something that is required that everyone goes through. Let's delineate between the play and the drama of initiation and the real multidimensional nature of, you could say, initiation or awakening or gnosis. So let's change the word for a moment. Let's talk about gnosis, because gnosis is the true initiation, right? So what is gnosis? Gnosis is when you finally awaken or become illuminated to the truth that you are a multidimensional immortal being who, for whatever reason, for better or for worse, are having a temporary experience in the earth life plane. That you are not here permanently, that you're here for a very brief time, but that your soul comes from the permanent place. It comes from the source of all thought, all life, all existence, all consciousness. It comes from the one true God. You're a tiny little spark. Like when you see the sun and you think of like the rays lashing off the sun and all those, plasma waves or whatever they call it. And you think, how big is the sun? Rhetorical question. It's huge, right? It's like millions of times bigger than the earth, something like that. I'm not sitting here Googling numbers. I don't need to, but you get the point.
How do you measure that though?
Dude, I don't know. Lasers. But I think they say lasers, right? But the sun is enormous. It's way bigger than the earth, right? But think about, for light to exist, there's got to be, I don't know a number, so I'm just going to say trillions and trillions and trillions of photons. I'm pretty sure that for you to even observe a speck of light, that has to be a collection of like 60 photons or something like that. So a light that big, the sun, the biggest light in our solar system, how many photons is that? It's an unfathomable, inconceivable number. I mean, I don't know if that could be calculated, possibly. Every one of those little individual photons that make up the light of the sun, as we understand it, that's like our souls.
10 to the 45th power every second.
That's an inconceivable number. And that's photons coming from the sun. I'm talking like,
right.
Look at the ball, look at the disk, whatever it is. That collection. How many photons is that? Dude, we can't even fathom that. Our brains can't compute that. The only way you could compute that is if you go up there and you measure it. Nothing can touch it. It burns to a crisp, right? All those little photons that make up the sun, that's like an allegory of all the different consciousnesses that emanate from the one true God. That's the source of all life and all creation. So this is the initiation. This is the gnosis. That you are an immortal being and that you're having a spiritual experience. That the purpose you come here for is to evolve to the next level of understanding. That we get caught up in the game, Hey, look, I play the game. I have a wife and a son on the way. I've paid taxes. I play video games. I do fun stuff. I consume art. I do all that same stuff everybody else does to a degree. We get distracted by the pleasures of life and by the routine of life. But even life itself is an allegory for the like the cycles of life, right? Our little being a baby and then becoming an adult and then becoming old and then dying and returning and then we're reborn. All of that is just allegories of higher order concepts that are beyond our human understanding. Everything down here in the earth life plane is like little tiny microcosmic dramas of the greater spiritual truths. If you look at any spiritual symbol, it has many meanings. If you look at the Ankh, right? You stand it up, you have the circle on top, the cross. in one respect, it means the sun is crossing over the Nile. In another respect, it is the ovaries and the male genitals. It's the masculine and the feminine. And there's even more meanings than that I can't recall off the top of my head. I'll have to get my Egypt guy on here. But that's just two, off the top of my head, like two definitions of one symbol. How can it mean two things? It can mean a lot of things because life is multidimensional. You look at a Templar cross. They say it's the sun, right? It's also a toroidal field. Many things. You look at, I'm blanking on symbols right now. The pentagram, or not the pentagram. The fish? Well, sure. I don't know much.
Vesica Pisces.
Yeah, the Vesica Pisces, right. You look at the pentacle with the 5-pointed star turning up with the circle. They say that, if you divide the lines and the sections of that, it gives you the perfect mathematical ratio for spirals, okay? Well, we know that is one of the primordial expressions of how consciousness moves through dimensions, right? According to these ancient traditions. But then also, you could look at it as the 5 elements. The top is spirit, fire, water, earth, air, that it represents all 5 of the elements. So symbols always have multiple meanings. That's because truth and life is multidimensional. Human life is multidimensional. Things have multiple meanings. On one level, saying, I love you to my wife and getting married and raising a family is, just the normal thing. It's just what I do on earth. Same with you, same with everybody. We all do it. It's part of, what we do. We just find somebody and we want a partner. We don't want to be alone. We want to find love in this world. We want to do our thing. Most people, they have kids, whatever their thing looks like that they want to do. On a higher level, it's like your higher self choosing to come here to express these things so that you experience all these different perspectives and grow on a soul level. So things have multiple meanings. They have meanings from the perspective of our experience down here on earth and how we perceive them and experience them. Then they have the perspective of the higher dimensions, which are way, way more complicated levels of reasoning and understanding of such basic things as when you express love on the physical level, and I don't just mean romantic, I just mean a kind act, in the realm of frequency and energy and spirit, you are uniting opposed forces and attracting them together. So on the one hand, it's like, dude, you look good in that shirt. Down on the human level, that was really nice. Thank you. But on the spiritual level, there is a power and a force behind that expressed act of kindness that is drawing your magnetic field closer to mine. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Multidimensional. It's always multidimensional.
Do it again. Give me another compliment. No, I'm just kidding. Can I say something unrelated? Completely unrelated?
Sure.
And I just want to preface this by saying there's plenty of people smarter than me out there. In fact, I'm the dumbest person in the room. I'm looking at the cross section, like the inside of a sun, according to a diagram on a website. And I'm sitting here thinking about fundamentally believing that this cross section of the sun showing me the inside of the sun is accurate is just as much of a
leap
as like religion. It's like faith.
Yep. From an authority.
I'm not going to get on my sun denying soapbox here. I'm just saying I've never been to the middle of the sun. No one's ever been to the middle of the sun. No one's ever cut the sun open or even probed it. So, anyway.
Well, there's something to that. There's a religion of people who have very, very serious reasons to convince people of a certain model of the universe that doesn't leave any room for consciousness or spirit. That model is dying.
It's okay to believe in this image of the sun that I found online. It's also okay to believe in Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
That's where I'll leave that.
I can't.
That's where I'll leave it.
Yeah. But so let me just kind of I want to wrap up.
Track.
Yeah. I want to get back on track. No.
Sorry.
No, not at all. I'm just saying I want to wrap up shortly. So I'm going to kind of pound out the last little bit here, but I just wanted to stress that to me, initiation means that you are, you more or less have passed through a window of perception where there is some event, outer and inner, that have occurred in your life where you don't see things the same anymore. That spiritually, you evolve to a new level of understanding. You look at people differently and you think, he probably just had a bad day. That's why he's treating me that way. Or that person is a malevolent spirit. I can't trust them because they don't have any spiritual, understanding or capacity in their life, and they are very dark and malevolent, and I don't want them in my field. You just start to think about things differently when you reach new levels of understanding of things. And having seen thousands of people in my life, literally in person and otherwise, go through different levels of, just on the one hand, having orb sightings, and how it completely blows their mind and changed their lives. You never know what you're going to get. But the point is, people get they completely change. They go through these, it's like a portal where you just have these realizations. Like the orb is so powerful. Seeing the orbs, the beings, the angels, it's so powerful because even it is multidimensional. Because on the one hand, in order to see it, you have to be spiritually evolved to a certain level to where your actual senses are able to perceive it, which I do believe has to do with the development of the pineal gland. But then on the other hand, the event itself, which is seeing it, serves as a catalyst for this evolutionary process. So sometimes I feel like it's the chicken or the egg, which one comes first. Either way, they're linked. There's something to be noted about seeing beings of light, or what most people understand as UFOs, and having an initiatory spiritual awakening event, and that they are intrinsically linked. So for the people at home, what should I do? How do I see this? Where should I, how should I better myself? Well, let me just get to Rudolf Steiner. Rudolf Steiner is really cool. I believe he lived in the 1800s. I know we did an episode on him. I'm going to just kind of briefly glaze by him, but Rudolf Steiner could be said to be, as far as the public is concerned, with just like being an author, writing books, putting it out there. You don't have to, go through any initiation process or whatever. Rudolf Steiner is probably the most prolific, publicly available Rosicrucian thinker. He probably, other than like the orders themselves, he probably has given the most to the world about the science of initiation and the path of developing the psychic senses. I mean, he has tons of books, dude, like Knowledge of Higher Worlds and How to Perceive Them or How to Attain Them, The Way of Initiation, Occult Sciences, stuff like that. Like he has so many books just laying this out for the layman. You can just buy the book and read it. It's right there. You don't have to do any secret, anything, So what I like about Rudolf Steiner is he started his own movement, basically called anthroposophy. And he actually was more or less, we talked about this on the Steiner episode, he was more or less removed from theosophy, or he just like quit. But he was a part of it at one point, and he just phased out of it because he wasn't perfectly aligned with it and he saw things different. And I'm more of a Steiner guy. I think Steiner is very profound. And that night, many years ago, when I was in Asheville and I hung out with Dr. Gilbert, that was one of the things he kept getting me on was Rudolf Steiner. He was like all about Rudolf Steiner. And he's very legit. I think Rudolf Steiner is very profound. He's one of the greatest thinkers in human history. And without rambling anymore, the whole point is that the Steiner approach is all about walking this path without an authority, without a higher power. You don't have to go to some order. You don't have to go to church. Those are great. Those are fine. You can do those things. You don't have to not do the things you want to do as long as they're good and they bring you value and benefit to your life, right? But the point is, truly, you don't need those things. It's like riding a bicycle. Okay, well, if you want to leave the training wheels on because it makes you happy and you're more comfortable, that's totally fine. Like, you can ride with training wheels on. There's nobody's this like, no, you have to take those off. But when you become an adept at riding a bicycle, you don't need your father or your mother's hand on your back holding you up anymore. And you don't need the training wheels. You can balance straight down the middle on your own, and you can keep the bicycle vertical, and you can ride it without assistance. That's kind of like the spiritual path. Like, if you want that assistance, power to you. I'm not going to judge you. I don't think anybody should. But you don't need those things because God is within sight of you. It's directly inside of you. You are completely divine and come from God and the original source of all life and all creation. So all of that material and information can be found within you, and you can walk the path because the guru or the master does not have the power to make you walk the path or give you the ability. All they can do is guide you or teach you. But really, it's because you are equally as special as them. You know what I'm saying? So Rudolf Steiner's interpretation of initiation, often translated from German as Einweihung, is central to his anthroposophical teachings on spiritual development. He describes it as the culmination of a deliberate, modern path of esoteric training that allows individuals to consciously access higher spiritual worlds and gain direct knowledge of supersensible realities. This is not an ancient, secretive temple ritual bestowed by priests as in older mystery traditions like Egyptian or Rosicrucian paths, but a self-initiated process accessible to anyone who cultivates the necessary inner faculties through moral, meditative, and cognitive exercises. In his key work, Knowledge of the Higher Worlds and Its Attainment, also published as How to Know Higher Worlds or The Way of Initiation, Steiner outlines initiation as the third and highest of the three main stages in spiritual schooling. Number 1, preparation. This involves cultivating reverence, inner tranquility, moral purity, and control over thoughts and feelings. It awakens dormant soul capacities and begins to form subtle organs of spiritual perception. Enlightenment or illumination, step 2. Illumination. Through meditative contemplation, like focusing on natural objects like stones or plants or animals and eventually human beings, one develops clairvoyant-like perception of spiritual forces and colors flowing from beings. This stage builds inner light and insight into the etheric and astral realms. Initiation. Number 3. This is the stage where the soul unites fully with the spiritual world, enabling direct experience of higher realities. Seeing orbs, people! It involves confronting and passing symbolic trials. The fire trial for the strength of character and will, the water trial for control over emotions and reliance on spiritual writing or intuitive grammar. Remember, we talk about the allegory of Jesus walking on water. Perhaps it really means learning to be in control of your emotions. The air trial for freedom and thought and commitment to truth. And I guess there's no earth trial that I'm seeing here. These trials test the initiate's maturity, ensuring they can handle spiritual knowledge without egoism or illusion. That's important. Steiner emphasizes that true initiation accelerates what would otherwise unfold over many incarnations. It grants knowledge and proficiency in the spiritual realms that cannot be obtained otherwise in our current era. The initiate gains continuity of consciousness beyond sleep and death, encounters the guardian of the threshold, a being representing one's own unresolved karma and lower nature. So coming into contact with your ego it's usually pretty frightening and scary. And ultimately transforms their being to perceive divine truths directly. Importantly, Steiner stresses ethical prerequisites, initiation or spiritual initiation. Again, we're not talking about ritual here. I wanted to end with the Steiner bit to talk about the individual process, right? But Steiner stresses ethical prerequisites. Initiation demands modesty, patience, reverence, moral integrity, and service to others. Without these, attempts at spiritual development can lead to hardening of the heart, delusion, or danger. He presents this as a modern path suited to the current age, rooted in Rosicrucian traditions, but adopted for free. Individual striving rather than guru-dependent submission. For deeper reading, you can check out Knowledge of the Higher Worlds and Its Attainment. There's chapters on the stages of initiation and also on initiation. The mysteries of initiation, he gives lectures on historical and modern forms of it. And, the Steiner path is practical and experiential. When you follow his exercises persistently, the belief is that, or rather the experience is that new spiritual organs form. And I do believe with modern science and understanding of this subject and phenomenology, studying experiencers like my family and other people, we know that continually having profound spiritual experiences actually evolves parts of the brain, right? So the point of that is I wanted to stress to people the notion that there is a process that actually occurs within the individual when walking the spiritual path. And the most important path, I believe, is what I like to call the way. I believe that is consisting of, great moral character, having virtue, having ideals. Why is it called the way? Well, I just came up with that because there's a million things you could call it. And I think that's just a very easy, pretty nondescript thing. But it's like Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life. None can get to the Father except through me. Well, you even know that according to, Gnostic tradition, it is elaborated on the notion that it's not about, worshiping Jesus or anything like that, but it's more or less he's inviting you to follow along on the path that he is treading. That you can do this too. That if you live like I do, that if you use me as an example and you behave this way, you love your neighbor, you love your God as you love yourself. It says at the end of the book of John, when I leave here, you guys are going to do more miracles than me. And no amount of books in the world, basically like all the pages of every book in the world will be filled with the miracles that you guys will be able to achieve when I leave, is what he was saying. So the spiritual evolution is something that is fated to occur in all of us. But I believe now, in the era that we're in, it's more important than ever to walk this path. So there's not going to be a moment where you're like, oh, I'm having my initiation, unless you're, a part of an order or something. But otherwise, it's a call to have great moral character, virtue, treating people with kindness and love and respect, not being hateful and lacking empathy for other people. Following on from last week's episode, I do believe there is a divergence of consciousness happening between good and evil. And I think it's more important than ever to cultivate goodness and the spiritual path in our lives because, reality itself is changing, I believe. The actual dimension that we live in my belief, it is fractured and it is beginning to split. And that's not a physical thing. That is invisible. But that is more or less reflected in the way that people on earth begin to feel, think, perceive, and behave. And there are many of us around the world who are like, this is pretty awesome. I go outside and I talk to the night sky. I see angels. Amazing things happen around me. But then there's other people that all they want to talk about is politics. All they want to talk about is the negative stuff happening in the world. For them, it's hell. It's not hell for me. I see a lot of bad things are happening out there in the world. I get that. But it doesn't have to be hell. That's not true to me. That's not my experience. My experience is that I'm surrounded by goodness and angelic entities, and there is really bad negative things happening out there that I'm just like, oh, that's terrible. Send them love and move on. Alex, let's go record. I want us to inspire some people today. You know what I mean? So that's the difference, that there are many people in this world who all life is for them is hell. They're like going mad from the trap of what's being told to them and how they're being programmed to think and believe. They're on autopilot and they don't have, that cultivated awareness to be able to see through illusion. But anyway, I think it's more important than ever for all of us to, just do the best we can with what we got, Stay positive. Any thoughts?
No, good episode. Good job.
Awesome. We're both wearing white today.
That's right. But that's also me every episode. You're jumping my bandwagon. But you look great in that shirt.
Way to make that positive.
I did at the end. You look great.
Yeah, you're right. You did at the end. Bye, guys.